to talk to you all. And before we start, I do want to do a quick poll. So if Annabelle, could you bring that up? So I'm curious, how many of y'all are postdocs versus graduate students? And this will help me gauge maybe where you are in your career and how to communicate this to you. So, ooh, there's others. If you're an other, can you put what that means in the comment section or in the chat? That'd be helpful. Great, so it looks like mostly graduate students. Excellent, a few postdocs, amazing. Okay. Oh, staff person, wonderful. Awesome, okay, I guess we can end that. So yes, mostly graduate students, amazing, and welcome the postdoc who joined. Thank you so much for joining. So here are the results. Can you guys see the results? I'm not sure. Okay. Well, we can close that out and I'll continue on to the presentation. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'll share this screen. So today, like the title of this says, I'm going to be talking about maximizing team potential through a culture of inclusion. Now, as Karen and Annabelle said, I'm the founder of the STEM Thrive Guides, which I'll discuss a little bit about. And I think that's the perspective at which I'm coming to this talk through. And that's important for you all to know. So they kind of said my background is in physics and material science, right? So it's like, how did I go from physics and material science to then be talking about diversity and inclusion? Well, turns out there's not many women in physics and engineering. And so I experienced a lot of harassment and discrimination throughout my education and the different places that I've worked. And what I realized, this knowledge wasn't really taught to me back in those days. As I was a student, I took so many professional development courses, but none covered how to navigate bias, harassment, and discrimination at work and school. And with everything I learned, I figured, why don't I create that content so that people can learn and not have to suffer and struggle through it as much as I did. And so that was the basis for starting the STEM Thrive Guides, which I currently have a few online courses on how to navigate those inappropriate behavior, difficult situations at work and school. And I'll provide information on that at the end of the presentation. As far as management goes, I'm still in my early career, though you can see in the bullet point, I was a team coordinator within my own company. And so I do have experience managing a team within a corporate structure. I've also founded multiple student organizations in graduate school and undergrad. And so I have experience with managing students, managing graduate students, managing employees in a company. And then finally with my business, I'm getting the skills to manage people within a business setting where I'm the owner of that business. So this is my experience. I just want to say that first and foremost. So if you have any questions, I hope I can answer them, but I want to keep this an open dialogue. And if you have any questions I can't necessarily answer in this training, I'll definitely get back to you with an answer at a later date. A later date soon. So today we're going to be going through a few different topics. So first I'm going to start with an exercise I call the perfect manager. And then we'll do an introduction to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Just make sure we're all on the same page with those terms and definitions. And then I'll go into maximizing your team's potential and then include 5 ways you can support diverse team members. Because I want to get to the meat of what can you do as a manager on a day-to-day basis to make sure that you're providing an inclusive environment for your team to thrive? So when you're a graduate student or a postdoc, you're focused on your own tasks, right? Typically, like when I was in graduate school, I was the only person working on my project. I had an advisor and I did have some lab mates, but they were doing something completely different. So you can feel kind of isolated sometimes. But in a corporate setting, in a business setting, you're going to be most likely on a team and have a team. And especially as a manager, you're going to be, of course, overseeing people. And this means that your job roles are going to shift from working on your own set of tasks to supporting other people in completing their team's set of tasks. and the way that you're evaluated, your performance is evaluated, and the way you reach goals is not towards you actually completing these little detailed tasks, but it's more towards supporting your teammates in supporting their tasks and completion of those tasks. So now put yourself in, think about all the workplaces you've been in, maybe graduate school, undergraduate. You've probably had a boss at some point or another, right? Maybe a few bosses. And I want to have this Jamboard exercise for you all to start off, where you think about what are your top 3 favorite qualities of your favorite boss and the top 3 least favorite qualities of your least favorite boss. So like, why did you have those qualities for the favorite boss and the least favorite boss? So should I stop screen sharing, Annabelle? Is that how we do this?
Yeah, if you can stop screen sharing and I can share my screen so everybody can see the results. So I sent the link through the chat, and if you click on this little icon right here, the sticky note, you'll see a sticky note appear. You can write in your quality. So I can say great listener. Oh, misspelled that, that's okay. And then you can move them around. So either your favorite quality or move them to your least favorite qualities.
Amazing. So we'll just spend a few moments. Go ahead and put your ideas there. Like I said, 2 to 3 is fine. We have about 22 people, so we'll have plenty, I'm sure. These are great. I'm seeing empathy, humble, transparent, emotionally available. Yes, easy to get in touch with, honest and direct. Expression of gratitude, acknowledges and thanks employees for their hard work. Good listener. These are great. Encouraging. Yes. Invested in employees' professional development. I like that one. That's very good. So they care about you. Good time management and workload negotiation. That's really important. Oh, okay. I see some negative qualities coming out now. I'm guessing. I'm like, micromanaging. That doesn't sound like a favorite quality. Okay, there we go. Yes, unprofessional. Stringing employee along and not being honest. Oof. Oof, I feel these. I feel these right now. Not accountable. These are great. And we're going to provide this Jamboard for you after this presentation. So you'll have these for yourself if you want to reference this, because I think this is an excellent exercise for you to realize, what kind of manager do you want to be? Like, do you want to be in the right side or the left side of this? Races hiding in plain sight. Oh, yeah. Not accountable, is not upfront about expectations, distrustful, unprofessional, putting people down, ignores, overrules potential difficulties in projects. So yeah, everyone look at these. I think, Annabelle, there's one on the favorite qualities, the stringing employee along, not being honest, that can be moved to the right side. And yeah, that uninterested. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Thanks for organizing all of that. It's like a video game. Sexist, hard stop. Yeah, that's not fun. Great. So we see so many of these qualities, and I want you all to look at these and think about the themes you see. Think about what makes a poor manager and what makes a great manager. You'll see a lot of these aren't really to do with maybe the work itself, right? I mean, some of them are like resistant to feedback or input from the team, or gives commands without explaining the rationale, easy to get in touch with. Like, those have to do with the actual work, but really it's how they make you feel, how that manager makes you actually feel. And so let's go ahead and move to the next part of this. Thank you so much for all these different amazing qualities. I think you all did a great job in summing up this, and I'm going to present now. Here we go. share. So now that we've gone all through that, now I made this slide before we even did this exercise, but I think this really rings true. We have the best qualities and the worst qualities, right? So with the best qualities, all of those had to do with how that manager made us feel. They made us feel valued, respected, appreciated, safe, and comfortable. And then the worst qualities are the opposite of this, right? Disrespected, unappreciated, taken for granted. I can't even see the other ones, they're blocked. Okay, unsafe and uncomfortable. So you'll notice that, it's how that manager makes you feel. And so when you're approaching management, the work is definitely important. But when it comes to leading a team and managing a team and caring for your team's tasks, what's going to drive that team to be excellent, to perform, and to thrive is how you make them feel and how you value them, not necessarily being that drill sergeant of let's get it done, or leading by fear tactics or intimidation. And you'll notice that, okay, also think about which box are you in when you're doing your best work? Are you feeling scared and unappreciated and disrespected and taken for granted? Are you doing your best work when you feel that way? Probably not, right? We do our best work when we feel valued and appreciated and safe and comfortable, safe to take risks in our work. And a lot of us, like, I'm a research scientist, like I take a lot of risks. I don't know if the experiment's going to work, but I got to bet that my team isn't going to shred me to pieces if I make a mistake and it's not going to work well, right? And so that is what we call the box on the left, the best qualities, is what we call psychological safety within a workplace. And that is exactly the kind of influence as a manager that you want to have on your team. You want it to be a psychologically safe environment. And now you're wondering probably like, okay, well, I do my best work when I feel safe. Like my manager, a best manager would make me feel safe and comfortable and valued and respected, right? Now, when we think of this through a lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, what I want to point out is that these negative emotions are the same emotions that someone feels when they're being harassed or discriminated against or experiencing bias, right? So when those employees are experiencing harassment, bias, discrimination, they're not going to be doing their best work. Like it all feeds into it. And so if you want as a manager, if you want your team to be thriving, you can't have any kind of bias or harassment going on or being perpetuated without a resolution. And that's a key component that I think is missing from a lot of companies, universities. There's no way for someone who's being harassed to easily resolve the issue without fear of retaliation, right? And as a manager, you can take on that leadership role to provide that psychological safety for your team, for all of its members. Okay, so I hope this opened your eyes and maybe helped you see something a little differently or just validated how you feel about this topic to begin with. Now I want to go into some definitions just to make sure that we're all on the same page, because I'm going to be talking about bias, harassment, discrimination, and microaggressions. So the definition of bias is it's a disproportionate weight in favor of or against an idea or thing, usually in a way that is closed-minded, prejudicial, or unfair. And biases can be innate or learned. Gender bias, as an example, is, say someone has a bias about women. You could have two approaches, right? You could either hire a woman because you think she's better for the job than a man for some gender-related reason, or you can not hire women and hire a man instead, or because you may perceive them to be more qualified, for instance. That would be a bias. And so that's an example of bias. And then we have harassment. So harassment is defined as an aggressive pressure or intimidation. Now, we're all in California and you all are in the University of California. So we have a specific legislation that actually defines all these terms for us. And this is what's really important. No matter where you move, it's important to know what your local legal protections are and what are covered. And so in California, we have the FEHA, which encompasses two forms of harassment. There's quid pro quo and hostile work environment harassment. And just real quickly, quid pro quo is when a supervisor asks an employee to engage in a sexual activity as a condition of receiving some form of benefit at work. whereas hostile work environment is just when harassing conduct and workplace bullying create an abusive work environment. And notice that the hostile work environment can not just be created by coworkers and supervisors, but also with clients and vendors. So people who may not even be on the company's like salary payroll, they may just come in every now and then to, I don't know, serve lunch or do some other kind of task. You can still be in a toxic environment because of that. Anyone on the job site. And then examples of harassment. So I have a few listed here just to provide more clarity in case you need that. So it could be anything from pressuring someone to go on a date or offensive jokes. That offensive jokes is something I hear a lot. That's actually harassment. Ostracizing behavior, intimidation tactics, physical threats of violence, physical attacks, those kinds of things. And this is a short list. There's so many more examples. And then for microaggressions. So microaggressions is a category of harassment. And I don't go really in depth in microaggressions here. There's different basically categories of microaggressions themselves. But just shortly, they're everyday verbal, nonverbal, and environmental slights, snubs, or insults, whether intentional or unintentional, which communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messaging to target people's based solely on their marginalized group membership. And you'll see below a list of different groups that are categorized. And in our legal protections, it actually outlines what different categories are of people, of groups of people are protected. And so if you are looking at something, an instance, and wondering, is this legal? Is this illegal? A good thing to do is look back at the laws and make sure that that harassment fell under one of these protected categories. If it doesn't fall under the category, it can still be classified as harassment, but there's different ways of approaching it. So it's good to be aware of that, our legal protections. And here are just a few examples of microaggressions. I'll be providing this PowerPoint at the end. And then also I have online courses available through my website, the STEM Thrive Guides, that give you a huge list of examples of microaggressions. Because I think some things we may not even interpret as a microaggression because it's so normalized by society. Like failing to pronounce someone's name correctly after they have corrected you. That's something that may not be obvious to someone that that's actually a microaggression. So I'll provide that list after. And then discrimination. So discrimination is the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people or things, especially on the grounds of race, age, or sex. And the difference between harassment and discrimination is that harassment just happens in the workplace outside of official job duties, but then discrimination is when you're engaging in activities as part of the official duties. So harassment would be like if someone were to bully you or call you a rude name based on a certain category demographic that you are. And then discrimination is when, say, you're not picked to do a project because you're a woman or because you're Asian or whatever it may be. So that's the difference between harassment and discrimination. So now I want to ask you, after going through all of this, which for some of you, you may be like, oh, I already know all this, which is great. That's wonderful. And if this opened your eyes a little bit, that's amazing too. But I'm curious, I know this takes a level of courage to say, but I'm curious how many of you have ever been a target of bias, harassment, or discrimination or microaggressions at work or school in particular. And we have a poll. It's anonymous, so we won't see, and I won't ask who picked what. I'll just say I've been harassed. I've said that at the beginning of the presentation, and it's actually, Annabelle, can you start the poll or do I have to stop sharing?
Oh no, I just started the poll.
Oh, amazing.
Yes, I will share the results.
Amazing. Okay, I can't see it. But yes, when it's actually, according to statistics and data that's been gathered about harassment, it's more likely than not that you'll experience harassment at some point in your career. I think different polls range from 60% to 90%. I know for undergraduate women in physics, it's 75% of them have been harassed in their undergraduate program. And that's a crazy statistic. It shouldn't be that way, but unfortunately it is. And Okay, has everyone voted?
Yes, the majority of the group did.
Okay, I don't know if I can see it.
Oh, it's not showing your,
Can you just tell me the results?
let me see. Yes, I'll tell you the results. So the question, have you ever been a target of bias, harassment, microaggressions, or discrimination at work or school? We have 63% that indicated yes, 26% indicated no, and 11% I'm not sure.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So yeah, just it looks like the majority of people just in this session have experienced that. And I'm really sorry that most of you have. And you know, but the fact that you have experienced that really can help you develop your superpower as a manager in empathy, because you know what it feels like to feel that way, right? And I think whether you've been harassed or not, you can still develop that empathy, but especially when you have a record of having been harassed, having been discriminated against, you can really use that to add value as your position as a management position. So don't feel like that's a shameful burden that you know is like a strike on your record. No, it's normal, and it'll help you in the long run, actually. So, and for those of you who haven't been harassed but are still here today, I really commend you on being here and being open to learning. And this will also feed into your superpower of empathy. So I'm also curious, I have another poll for you, which is, what do you know what DEI is, or how familiar are you with DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion? So Karen or Annabelle, can you run that poll?
Yes, I opened the poll.
Amazing.
Let's see.
Oh, there, I can see it now.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, waiting for
You
a
guys
few
can
more
probably
people
see
to vote. We have 17 of 22 that
That's perfect.
participated.
So seems like most of you are somewhat familiar, and then very familiar, a few no, and a little familiar. Okay, so it's a pretty even distribution. I'm glad a lot of you have heard of DE&I, and for those of you who haven't, welcome. I'm so excited for you. Okay, so DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is something that should have been in place a long time ago, but it's something that's more and more becoming a buzzword, especially with Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement. These kinds of things are incentivizing companies to invest in making sure that the workplaces are diverse, equitable, and inclusive. So the definition is that DE&I is a term used to describe programs and policies that encourage representation and participation of diverse groups of people, including people of different genders, races and ethnicities, abilities and disabilities, religions, cultures, ages, and sexual orientations, and people with diverse backgrounds, experiences, and skills and expertise. So it covers a lot of things, right? And so what does this exactly mean? Now, this example is used a lot in DE&I trainings. It's the example of the dance. So let's say we're having a good old dance. Maybe it's prom. That's what the picture is. It looks like in the right corner. But we're having a dance. Let's say to make it diverse, we're going to invite everyone. So no one group of people is singled out as not being able to come. But then when we find out that everyone's invited, there's some people who say need wheelchair access to enter the building. And so that's when we bring in equity. And here we have a wheelchair ramp. So people can go on the stairs or go up the wheelchair ramp. And taking a step further, maybe the loud music really bothers people who are neurologically diverse. And so maybe we can make it a silent disco where everyone wears those headphones. And so you can opt into listening to the music or not and listen to it at your own volume, right? There's different ways to make sure that everyone can access and take part in the dance in this setting. And then finally, inclusion, because you have it diverse and you have this equity set up so that everyone can access it, everyone is included, everyone can dance and have a great time. So this is a simple example of how to think about DE&I. And so in a corporate setting or in a university setting, you can think of this as diversity as in hiring. Who are you hiring, or who are you bringing into the university? Equity, how are students accommodated for their different backgrounds or abilities or disabilities within that workplace. And then inclusion, are students listened to and valued and on an equal level? I say students, but also employees. Are we just putting the bodies in the room, or are we listening and valuing the ideas of those bodies? Are we valuing those minds? And the big question, so this is where we know what DE&I is, and a lot of companies and universities do, but the kind of hot potato that's passed from group to group and department to department is, who is responsible for implementing DE&I? Is it the leadership team, or is it the employees or contractors? And the truth is, it takes everyone. It really takes everyone to make sure that the DE&I within a company is, like, the company is being ethical, right? And so that means, as a manager, you have an important role in the DE&I to make your team inclusive, right? And as at the beginning, we talked about the reason why we want it to be inclusive, because if people feel like they belong and they're safe to do their tasks, then they're going to do their best work. And your team is going to be the most productive team, right? Your team is going to be optimized for success. So it really feeds into company goals. So as a manager, you set the standard, and your team members look to you for leadership and guidance in both work, but also in how you treat others. And so creating a culture of inclusion starts with you. It's your responsibility and your job to support an inclusive environment for your success, your team member success, and your organization's success. So now we get to the topic of this talk. I hope this was a great background to get you in the right headspace for this. So how can you now maximize your team potential through a culture of inclusion? Now, I'll just say it, this is a huge body of knowledge, and this presentation will not cover everything. And in fact, like, you as an individual, unless your PhD or your postdoc training is in actually like DE&I or inclusion and diversity or even human resources, you may not be the best qualified person in your company when you come in to start making recommendations for that company. But there are still things you can do and ways to influence your company towards the right direction, because we all play a role, right? So the best way to start as a manager is to actually make sure that your company is doing something along the lines of DE&I in your workplace. And that can be through hiring a DE&I consultant to evaluate the needs of your workplace and then act based on their recommendations. So you actually bring in an expert. But tips for you on a manager, as a manager, is what I want to focus on, because there are things you can do and things that you should do as a manager. And these involve DE&I hiring practices, and then 5 tips I have for supporting diverse people in your organization. So DE&I really starts at hiring, right? You want to bring in a diverse set of people, the people who are most qualified for the job, no matter what their background or skill set is. And really what they've found is, even like boards of companies these days, they've done studies that found that if a board has at least one woman on it, which it's traditionally mostly men, the company will actually perform better. That's data. So it's seen, that's just one example, but it's seen that having a diverse team really helps the company and the organization thrive. So practices you can do for hiring include understanding your own explicit and explicit versus implicit biases and how they can inform your decisions. And you see on the left, I have a link in the additional resources on a exercise you can do to learn your own implicit biases. So I really recommend you look into that to develop your own self-awareness. We all have biases, it's normal. And so it's just important to be aware of those. The next thing you can do is to take care when you're writing job descriptions to include inclusive language. So if, for example, if you have something like fast-paced work environment, or like you have to work overtime or something like that, it could be not very inclusive towards people who have families and or have caretaking roles where they can't necessarily dedicate their weekends to coming into work, right? You need to be able to work with people and accommodate their needs. And so making sure your job description is written so that it attracts the diverse talent is really important. The next thing is to advertise job listings at minoritized people serving institutions, professional societies, and organizations. And as an example, because I'm in engineering, I included in engineering, there's Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, Society of Women Engineers, and National Society of Black Engineers. So those are 3 organizations right there that have job boards that you can advertise your jobs at so that you recruit from diverse pools of people who are underrepresented in your field. And the last thing, I have a long list of questions to ask yourself and your hiring team. And I'll only go through a couple. So like, why do we see the applicant this way? Could our norms or assumptions be factors? Is this conclusion evidence-based? Have we considered all perspectives? Look for ways to say yes. Things like this. So you're actually reflecting actively as you're interviewing people on, are we hiring this person because we're comfortable with them because they look like us? Or are we hiring them because we really think that they're the best person for the job and they'll bring this unique perspective that we don't have? So now let's move on to supporting diverse team members. So here are 5 things you can do from the moment you start your job as a manager to support diverse team members. The first is to reflect on how much influence you have within your organization. The second thing you can do is to trace the path from harassment to resolution. The third thing is to work with human resources or your DE&I team. The fourth is maybe my favorite one, which is documenting potential drama. And the fifth is implementing company-wide DE&I solutions. So first, how much influence do you have? Now, I remember starting off at my company, and I thought, I was put in charge of a very diverse team. I was the minority in a lot of ways, like the only woman, the youngest by like 20 years, the only American, the only person who spoke English as a first language. And the rest of my team didn't really want to work with me very much. Like they would actually meet without me and basically figure out how to work around me instead of with me. It was a really rough learning experience. But that situation showed me, you can have the title of manager, but how much influence do you really have at your company? And how much power do you have over, helping with the DE&I of your company? And so you can think of this as 2 levels, the company level and the team level. So at a company level, many companies say they want to have diversity, equity, and inclusion, but when it comes to actually being inclusive and implementing these things, they do what a lot of people call play diversity, which means that they don't really follow through with their commitments. You see this a lot with, they may be hiring diverse people saying, our DE&I is focused on hiring people from all different backgrounds, but then they don't actually change the systems within that company to be equitable and inclusive. And so that causes a high turnover rate of those diverse people who come in and realize, oh, I'm in a toxic environment. People are sexist, people are racist, people are homophobic. Like, I got to get out of here. And so it's important to realize that, no company is probably perfect, but if that company is working towards something, that's a company that you probably want to work with. And then as a manager in an organization, you do have influence, especially over the culture of your own team, but you likely don't have the kind of influence over the entire company to drastically transform its culture, unfortunately. And so in some cases, you can come in thinking, yeah, I'm going to be really inclusive and, my team's going to do great, but then your managers or the C-suite aren't really on the same page with that. And that can really put up barriers towards your own team's success. And then finally, on the team level, though, this is what you will have the most control over. You can actually leverage your position as a manager to influence the culture of your team to be inclusive. And that's what you should really be focusing on, especially when you're new to the company. The second thing you can do is to trace the path from harassment to resolution. So what do I mean by this? This means if someone on your team's harassed or if you're harassed, knowing what exact steps it takes to reach a resolution within your company. And every organization will be slightly different. For example, you may have a human resources department, or you may have like an office of equal opportunity and diversity, like at the university, or you may have nobody, like if it's a startup, there may be no solid reporting structure. So just being aware of that and seeing how that is actually, whether it's supporting the diverse people who are on your team or not, right? So ask these questions. Do people feel like they can be authentic at work? Do you feel like you can be authentic at work? And that'll really tell you, is this culture really inclusive? And what is the company culture around people who report harassment? Is it taboo to discuss? Do people fear reporting harassment for retaliation? What is your company policy for reporting and resolving issues related to harassment and discrimination? Who do you and your team members report instances to? And what happens after they report? Is it something that they're told, oh, don't worry about it, we'll take care of it, and then nothing happens? Or is there actually a system to reach a resolution? Does the company follow up with the person who submitted the report? Or do they gaslight them into thinking that they're crazy and it's not an issue, which happens more often than you'd expect? And finally, if your company does have an HR department, how are they structured to prevent and resolve an issue? Like there may be sexual harassment trainings, harassment prevention trainings, unconscious bias trainings. Those things exist, but are they really helping resolve the issue, or just kind of the plain diversity band-aid solutions? And then the second part is to ask yourself, if you were harassed or experienced discrimination, do you feel comfortable and safe reporting the issue to your manager or human resources? How would you document and report the harassment? Do you feel like your team members would retaliate in some way against you if they discovered that you reported? Would they treat you differently? How would your company work with you to resolve the issue? And what would you do if your company didn't work with you to resolve the issue? Would you leave? Would you report to someone else? Like, who could you actually work with to get this resolved? What needs to change for a resolution to be easy to be reached in the case that you or your team members are a target or bias? Sorry, if you or your team member are a target of bias, harassment, or discrimination, like what needs to change for a resolution to be easily reached? And that reflection will help how can you lead your team or foster that inclusion within your team so that if a situation arises, you can get that resolved and move on. Because interpersonal conflict is completely normal in a work environment, especially when we're bringing different groups of people together to work together. The third thing you can do, which I think is something that's overlooked a lot, is working with human resources and developing those professional resources. I know as a scientist and engineer, we often are so focused on our actual research experiments and everything that we don't really think about like other people within a company. And when it comes to, I don't know, enrolling in benefits or doing some other HR related tasks, we just kind of want to get it over with and move on to what we're actually working on, right? But actually, when you're a manager, you really want to form these connections with these different offices that are there to support you and your team. And HR performs many supportive tasks within companies, including handling reports of harassment and discrimination typically. So as you're interviewing with your company, you want to look at how does HR treat you in the onboarding process? And this could give you an idea of whether there are any red flags in the company itself. And then when you join in the first few months, you want to make sure that you schedule meetings with HR employees to get to know them and what they do and how they can support you in your role. And here are some starter questions I have for you. So if you don't know, like, what would I even ask them? What would I say? You can ask what policies and procedures are for any harassment or discrimination reports. Like, what are the policies and procedures for that? You can ask about the company's DE&I efforts. What are they doing to incorporate inclusivity and diversity and equity? And then ask what you as a manager could do to help them achieve their goals. Now, I think this last one is really the key, because that question of like, hey, you're in human resources, how can I help you? Especially if you're a manager, a big part of your task may be hiring people or doing performance reviews, and that involves human resources. And so if you ask HR, how can I make sure that when I do performance reviews, it makes your job a little easier? Maybe they have some tips for you. And what that really does, you may not even care so much about the answer, but what you care about is the relationship and making sure that you have an easy exchange with that HR manager so that if an issue arises, it's easier to work with them to resolve that issue, because you're not like oh, nice to meet you. I have a fire going on behind me and I need you to help me to put it out. No, they'll know you, they'll know your team because you'll have built that relationship with them. And so it's really being prepared for when an issue happens to quickly, easily resolve it so that your team can focus on your actual goals, right? And reaching your objectives. The fourth one, which I said is my favorite one, is documenting potential drama. And I think this is seriously a hack. This is like a hack on the system, okay? I actually picked this up from a post on Reddit of somebody whose father was an engineer manager and after his father passed, he found his potential drama logbook that he kept it with his company. And it's a great post, but basically what a potential drama log is a log of any instances that can lead to a bigger issues. So issues like lawsuits or interpersonal conflict or harassment, you want to have this record so that if, say, there is a lawsuit going on, if HR comes to you and asks, oh, did you know this and this and this were going on? You can look at your log and you can be like, well, Billy and Mac were by the water cooler last Thursday talking about some rumor that I heard. You'll have this strange, obscure record that could help you if you're questioned about your involvement in any kind of thing. So this can include examples that you can include in your log are complaints, rumors, times you gave accommodations to someone with substandard performance for trying, witnessing harassment, experiencing harassment yourself, and any kind of situations that you just felt uncomfortable or unsafe. Now, that last point, the situations that felt uncomfortable or unsafe, for me, when I teach my courses on how to navigate bias, harassment, discrimination, those feelings of fear, being uncomfortable, that is like a red flag for me to know that what just happened may have been an issue with a microaggression or harassment. It's kind of my internal barometer for, was this an issue? Like, should I be concerned about this? My own gut feeling. And so when you have those instances throughout work, you can document these in your potential drama log or whatever you want to call it. And then for each instance, you want to include the name of the involved parties, the date and time, details about what happened, how you felt, your productivity before and after the issue, and any messages or emails that were part of this issue. So if, say, someone wrote you a rude email, you'd want to save that email, write down how it made you feel, write about any other comments you have about that situation, maybe some context and the date and time that it was sent, and keep that in your log, for instance. And on the STEM Thrive Guides in my courses online, I actually have a whole course that's dedicated to how to document harassment, and I have that in the links with additional resources at the end of this presentation. And it'll be sent out to you too. Now for the last one, the final one, implementing company-wide DE&I solutions. Now this is the real thing that needs to happen. So all these other things are definitely things you want to do, but this is kind of the way you can leverage your position as a manager to positively influence your organization. And that's really implementing these DEI solutions that you may not be an expert on, and you don't have to be an expert on because you outsource it or you build a team around it. So I have 3 different levels. The first is hiring a DE&I consultant. And there are many companies out there and consultants out there who do this. One of the companies that I've been in touch with through my business is Career Agility. I really like what they do because they actually provide a scorecard for your company that benchmarks this current status of your company's DE&I, and they provide a specific customized plan for you to improve based on that benchmark. So you can benchmark it over time and watch it improve, right? Hopefully it doesn't like not improve. That would be counterproductive. But I think hiring a consultant is just best if your funds are low. And so if you have like a small company or mid-sized company with limited resources, and you're just at the beginning stages of implementing solutions, starting with a consultant can just get you started. But I don't think it's a long-term, really great solution because a consultant in the end doesn't really have a lot of power within the organization. So the second level is to actually build a DE&I team or department. And this actually requires hiring dedicated staff including a C-level employee, like a CEO, CFO. You'd have like a CDO, like Chief Diversity Officer, CEO, CIO, Chief Inclusion Officer, something like that, because you want somebody to have power to make change within the organization. Okay. And just hiring, what some companies do that's not really a great practice is they'll actually just take the people who are the minorities in the workplace and say, okay, we're going to put you on a team to figure out how to make this company more diverse. And sometimes they're not even paid for this additional labor. Like that happens. And in fact, I know some people who that has happened to. So it's not the way to do it. The way to have it is hire a dedicated staff to actually do that and give them power. And this is best for companies with more resources who want to grow towards the level 3 level and need a team to transition the company. And finally, level 3 is actually embedding the DEI into the DNA of the company. And yes, this is a metaphor to the DNA in our bodies. Because really DE&I, like I said previously, it takes everyone. It doesn't just take one team. Everyone has to play a role in making sure that this place is equitable and inclusive and most productive, right? And so there are a few companies working on this. The two that I want to point out are Every.1 and Metaspace. And these companies are really innovating this space. It's like pun intended, I guess, really innovating DE&I in that they're using different types of metrics to actually optimize DE&I practices. So using like artificial intelligence, for example. So if your company has, say, like a high rate of people leaving the company, high attrition rate, and they want to retain talent, then that could be one data point on which to measure your DE&I practices. Because if you make the environment more inclusive, maybe that employee retention rate or attrition rate will go down and your retention rate will go up. So you see what I'm saying? There's different indicators and metrics data-wise that can be used to actually shift how companies are approaching DEI and making sure that all their systems and structures within the organization are optimized for that. And this is best for every company if they could afford it and have it. This is definitely the sure way of making sure that a company is inclusive. So really the key that I want you all to come away with this is just an overview of this topic. This is a huge topic. And you don't have to be an expert in it. Like I said, like you can always hire a consultant, hire people to advise you on this. I don't expect you to be an expert after this one presentation, but I want to make sure that you realize that this exists. This is out there to help you be the best manager you can be, and be in that the box on the left, right? Being the best quality manager. And the key is like you can be a novice or an expert in D&I practices. Just the key is to keep learning and approach situations with humility, because there's always more to learn. And I would add empathy too, right? Humility and empathy. So here's my contact information. At the top, I have the STEM Thrive Guides contact. And if you have any questions that aren't answered here, feel free to email me them. I'm really happy to get in touch with you. I also have a podcast that I recently started called Resilient in STEM, and I give information about documenting harassment in that podcast, as well as other information too. And I have a Facebook community as part of my business that's private. And so if you yourself are looking for support in navigating difficult situations, definitely recommend like following me on Instagram or finding me on some platform. I'm everywhere. So connect with me and I'll get you the resources that you need to do your best and to thrive in your environment, or figure out maybe what's next for you if where you're at is pretty toxic. And then I have my personal contact information on my website, and the additional resources will be in a link that Annabelle will send out to you that will be through my website. And there's a password that goes along with it. The password's UCI 2021. I think it's a pretty easy one to remember, but that will be included along with the resources as well. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with you all. So I'll take any questions now. Thank you so much for listening.